Imagine that terrifying moment. You spot someone attractive across the room, your heart pounds, palms sweat, and then that voice in your head whispers, "Don't even try." You already know what's going to happen, but here's the truth most people miss. You're not actually afraid of them saying no. You're afraid they'll confirm what you secretly fear, that you're fundamentally unworthy of connection. That's the real monster hiding under the bed. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to slay it. Have you ever wondered why rejection from a complete stranger can feel like they've ripped your soul out through your nostrils? It makes no logical sense. You didn't know them yesterday, and you won't know them tomorrow. Yet somehow, their opinion becomes this nuclear bomb capable of obliterating your self-worth. That's what we're solving today. When most people talk about overcoming rejection, they give you surface-level garbage like just do it more or remember it's not personal. But that advice completely misses what's actually happening in your brain. The real problem isn't the external rejection, it's the internal confirmation of your deepest fears. Think about it. If you already believe you're worthless, then rejection doesn't create a new wound. It just pours salt in one that's been festering for years. That's why the standard advice fails spectacularly. You can't just practice getting rejected if each rejection is confirming your core belief system. The hard truth? About 90% of your rejection fear has nothing to do with the other person. It's the relationship you have with yourself that's doing the damage. And that's actually good news because it means the solution is within your control. I discovered this the hard way. For years I thought my fear of approaching people was about them, their judgment, their response. But after one particularly brutal period where I couldn't even make eye contact with strangers, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't afraid of their rejection. I was afraid they'd see the same worthless person I saw when I looked in the mirror. Most of us walk around with this invisible scorecard. We've got this running tally of all the ways we don't measure up, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not interesting enough. And we're terrified that other people will see it too. That their rejection will be the final, damning evidence that confirms we are exactly as inadequate as we fear. But here's where it gets interesting. I had a friend, let's call him Marcus, who seemed completely immune to rejection. This guy would approach anyone, anywhere, without hesitation. One night, I finally asked him how he did it. His answer floored me. "I already know my value," he said. "Someone else's opinion doesn't change what I know to be true." That's when it clicked. Marcus wasn't braver than me. He wasn't more skilled or charismatic. He had simply solved the internal problem first. He wasn't afraid of confirming his worthlessness because he didn't believe he was worthless to begin with. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great, so I just need to magically fix my self-worth and then rejection won't bother me? Super helpful advice, genius. Don't worry, I'm not leaving you with some vague love yourself nonsense. I'm going to give you specific steps to rewire your brain's response to rejection. Here's the key insight. You need to desensitize yourself to self-rejection before you can handle social rejection. Let me repeat that, because it's the whole game. You must desensitize yourself to self-rejection before you can handle social rejection. Most people have it backwards. They try to build confidence through external validation. But external validation is like building a house on quicksand. One bad day, one harsh comment, and the whole structure sinks. So, how do you desensitize yourself to self-rejection? It starts with noticing that voice in your head. The one that constantly narrates all the ways you're falling short. That voice isn't you. It's just a pattern of neurons firing based on past experiences and programming, and like any neural pathway, it can be rewired. The first step is radical awareness. Start paying attention to how you talk to yourself. Most people would never tolerate from others the kind of verbal abuse they inflict on themselves daily. You're such an idiot. Why would anyone be interested in you? You're going to fail like you always do. Imagine saying those things to a friend or loved one. You'd never do it, right? So why is it acceptable to say them to yourself? Next, you need to create a pattern interruption. When you catch that voice starting its usual routine, stop and say out loud if possible. That's interesting, but not helpful. This creates a cognitive break that prevents you from identifying with the thought. You're not denying the thought exists, you're just refusing to accept it as truth. Here's a surprising fact. Studies show that self-compassion is actually more effective than self-esteem in building resilience to rejection. People who practice self-compassion recover from social setbacks faster and take more interpersonal risks than those focused on boosting self-esteem. But here's where most people get stuck. They think self-compassion means letting themselves off the hook or lowering their standards. That's completely wrong. Self-compassion isn't about making excuses. It's about removing unnecessary emotional suffering from your growth process. Think of it this way: if you're learning to play basketball, missing shots is part of the process. Adding self-flagellation doesn't make you a better player. It just makes learning more painful and slow. The same applies to social skills and handling rejection. Let me share a technique that transformed my approach to rejection. I call it rejection rehearsal, but with a critical twist. Instead of practicing getting rejected by others, you practice rejecting yourself, but in a conscious, controlled way. Here's how it works. Take out a piece of paper and write down your 3 deepest fears about why someone might reject you. Be brutally honest. Maybe it's I'm not successful enough, I'm not attractive enough, or I'm not interesting enough. Now look at those fears directly and say to yourself, even if these things were partially true right now, they don't define my worth as a human being. This is different from positive thinking or affirmations. You're not trying to convince yourself these fears are false. You're acknowledging that even if your worst fears have some truth to them, your value as a person remains intact. When you can look your deepest insecurities in the eye without flinching, external rejection loses most of its power. Now let's address the practical side. Once you've started this internal work, you can approach social rejection with a completely different mindset. Instead of seeing rejection as confirmation of your worthlessness, you can view it as simple information about compatibility. When someone rejects you, they're not making a universal statement about your value. They're expressing a personal preference based on a tiny snapshot of who you are. I once heard a world-class chef say something profound about criticism of his food. He said, "When someone doesn't like my cooking, they're not saying I'm a bad chef. They're saying their taste buds and my flavors didn't match today." What a perfect way to think about social rejection. Here's a mind-blowing question to consider. What if rejection isn't happening to you but for you? What if each rejection is actually steering you toward the people and opportunities that genuinely align with who you are? Let me give you an exercise that puts this into practice. The next time you face rejection, ask yourself, what's the gift in this? Maybe it saved you time with someone incompatible. Maybe it's teaching you something about your communication style. Maybe it's steering you toward something better. This isn't toxic positivity. It's strategic reframing that keeps you moving forward instead of spiraling into shame. The most successful people I know don't have fewer rejections than everyone else, they just process them differently. They extract the lesson without absorbing the shame. They take the data without taking the damage. Remember, rejection isn't personal unless you make it personal, and you only make it personal when you secretly agree with it. Now, I'm not promising you'll never feel the sting of rejection again. That's not realistic or even desirable. Pain contains important information. But there's a world of difference between feeling momentary disappointment and having your entire sense of self shattered. As you practice these techniques, you'll start noticing something remarkable. Not only will rejection hurt less, but you'll actually start getting rejected less frequently. Why? Because neediness and fear of rejection create a vibe that people can sense from a mile away. When you're no longer desperate for validation, you become infinitely more attractive. There's a beautiful irony here. The less you need others' approval to feel worthy, the more likely you are to receive it. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're trying differently, from a place of self-assurance, rather than self-doubt. So here's the real question. Are you ready to stop letting the fear of rejection control your life? Are you ready to stop asking for permission to exist confidently in the world? Start with that internal work. Challenge the voice that says you're not enough. Stand toe-to-toe with your deepest fears about yourself, and then watch how differently you move through the world when rejection loses its power over you. If this approach resonates with you, I'd love to continue this conversation. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. I'm creating content like this every week to help you build an unshakable sense of self that no rejection can touch. Remember, you're not afraid of rejection, you're afraid of confirming your worthlessness. But once you realize your worth isn't on the table in the first place, you're free to connect, free to risk, free to live without the constant shadow of other people's opinions, and that, my friend, is where the real adventure begins.